My name is Mariel Keaton. I'm 45 years old. And for the last 7 years, I've been the person Summit Housing could count on when deadlines loomed or permits threatened to derail a project. People described me as reliable, steady under pressure, the kind who kept her head while everyone else lost theirs. I wore those words like armor. They gave me purpose, even when it meant long nights and weekends traded for city council hearings or zoning board appeals. That Tuesday morning in Denver, I expected nothing more dramatic than another quarterly update. We gathered in the conference room, the air heavy with burnt coffee and the murmur of coworkers shifting in their seats. I had my project tracker open on my laptop, already planning how to shave 3 days off a contractor's schedule. Then Dan Willis, our CEO, cleared his throat at the front of the room. He wore that practiced, humble smile he used when he thought he was about to inspire us. "I've got some big news today," he said. The words landed like a stone in my stomach. He went on, his voice carrying with rehearsed warmth. "Starting next month, Jason Carter will step into the role of head of development." Applause burst around me. People clapped like this was the best thing that had ever happened to the company. Jason Carter, 25 years old, 3 months at Summit, and still asking me how to access zoning databases. He had been introduced as a market analyst shadowing Mariel to learn the ropes. And now, suddenly, he was my new boss. I blinked at my screen, as if maybe I'd misheard. But then Dan turned his gaze toward me. And I want to give special thanks to Mariel for bringing Jason up to speed so quickly. She's been an incredible mentor. Heat rose in my chest and flushed up my neck. My hands kept clapping, mechanical and hollow, until I let them drop into my lap. Jason half smiled, lifting his hand in a sheepish wave. Underneath, I caught the glimmer of a smirk. I forced my lips into a polite curve. On the inside, something I'd built for 7 years cracked wide open. The clapping still echoed in my ears when my mind slipped backward. 7 years to the day, everything fell apart. I was 38. Sitting at a kitchen table with a half-empty coffee mug and a bank statement that didn't make sense. By the time I called the number on the back of the card, the account was already drained. My ex-husband was gone California with some woman from a trade show, and I was left in Denver with a teenage son, a mortgage, and nothing close to a safety net. Evan was 15 then, still lanky and full of restless energy, pretending he didn't care while watching me shuffle papers with shaking hands. He never asked the question out loud, but I saw it in his eyes. Are we going to be okay? I needed an answer for him as much as I needed one for myself. That's when I found Summit Housing. Denver's skyline was sprouting cranes, whole neighborhoods transforming almost overnight. The city was building, and Dan Willis promised me I could build with it. He looked me in the eye in that first interview and said, "Stay the course. Mariel, leadership is coming." I wanted to believe him. So I threw myself into the work. Site inspections under 90-degree sun, zoning codes spread across my kitchen table, midnight calls with contractors trying to cut corners. I became the one who showed up when no one else wanted to. I'd crash on the couch sometimes, laptop still glowing, drainage codes scrolling through my half-closed eyes. Evan would hover in the doorway. "You live at work now." "Huh," he'd tease, though his voice carried more truth than joke. I'd promise him I'd take Saturday off, maybe catch one of his soccer games, but Saturday always turned into just one quick walkthrough. He stopped asking after a while. Work anchored me when everything else felt unstable, but it also chained me, a weight I couldn't set down. Every late night, every missed weekend, I told myself it was for Evan's future, for mine. What I didn't see was how easily someone else could climb the ladder I was still holding steady. 6 months before that Tuesday meeting, Dan stopped me in the hallway with the kind of offhand smile he used when pretending something was small. "Got a friend's kid starting next week," he said, adjusting his cufflinks like it was nothing, fresh out of school. "Just wants to see how things run. He'll be shadowing you for a bit." I nodded. I'd had interns before. College kids who lasted a summer before drifting into other careers. I figured this one would be the same. Jason Carter walked in 3 days later wearing loafers that had never touched dust, a spotless white shirt, and a watch that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. He extended a hand with the easy charm of someone who had never been ignored. "You must be Marielle," he said. "I've heard you're the operations queen around here." The grin told me he thought it was a compliment. I smiled politely, reminding myself that everyone had to start somewhere. From that day on, he was glued to my side. At site visits, he trailed behind me, taking notes in a leather-bound journal. At zoning meetings, he leaned back in his chair, spinning a pen like he was bored while I fought to explain drainage codes to city officials. In project reviews, he'd cut me off with questions that showed how little he understood, asking if software could just automate government approvals, as if Denver's planning office ran on apps. I answered his questions anyway. I gave him access to files, explained acronyms, even defended him once when he botched a survey entry. Part of me believed I was doing what a leader should: mentor, support, guide. Dan praised me for helping Jason find his footing, and I wanted to believe my patience mattered. But as weeks stretched on, patterns surfaced. Jason wasn't fading out like other rookies. He was everywhere, always positioned in the chair beside mine, always introduced like he belonged. Dan beamed at him in meetings, clapped his shoulder in the hallway. It hit me slowly, like a cold draft sneaking under a locked door. Jason wasn't learning. He was being rehearsed, and I was the one coaching him through every line. It was a Thursday night, close to 9. The office had thinned to silence except for the faint hum of the vending machine down the hall and the radio of the janitor humming a Spanish ballad. I was still at my desk, triple-checking zoning maps for a development in Aurora that had nearly gone off track the month before. Jason had left hours earlier, off to whatever bar or patio would welcome his stories about managing projects. I was gathering my papers when a voice carried down the corridor. Dan's office door was cracked, a sliver of light cutting into the dim hallway. I wasn't trying to listen, but the words reached me clearly. "Still no decision on that regional director position." The voice belonged to Victor Niles, one of Summit's long-standing investors. I'd met him only twice, a sharp-eyed man with a voice that carried the weight of numbers. Dan's laugh followed, low and smug. "She's a soldier, not a strategist. Rachel keeps the trains running." "Sure, but Jason's family." In a way, my chest tightened. I stood frozen, the zoning maps clutched against me like a shield. Victor didn't let it pass quietly. "Mariel's the one who's kept your projects from collapsing these last few years. She knows the field. Good in the field." "Yes," Dan replied, his tone dismissive. "But she'll never drive vision. Jason understands where the market's going, and he's connected. He belongs at the table." The conversation drifted into numbers after that, but I couldn't hear anymore. My ears buzzed, my breath short. The words replayed on a loop, each one cutting deeper than the last. Soldier, not a strategist. Family in a way. I slipped back to my desk, lowered myself into the chair. For a moment, grief swelled in my throat, a lump that threatened to break into tears. But then it hardened, cooling into something else. My hands steadied, my breathing slowed. I'd given 7 years believing loyalty was currency. Now I saw the truth: I was never meant to rise. The ceiling above me wasn't glass, it was concrete, and they'd poured it long ago. I shut off my monitor, the screen going black. Cold fury sat heavy in my chest where hope used to live. The next morning, the entire company was herded into the conference room. Dan stood at the front, radiating confidence as though the night's conversation had never happened. Bagels and lukewarm coffee lined the side table, as if carbs could sweeten betrayal. "Exciting news for the future of Summit," he announced, clapping Jason on the back. "Jason Carter will officially step into his role as head of development. He's already shown extraordinary promise, and we owe a special thanks to Marielle for guiding him." I nodded, forcing my hands together in polite applause. My palms felt wooden. Faces turned toward me. waiting for a smile. Pride, something. I gave them what they expected, a small dip of the head before slipping out the moment the meeting ended. At my desk, I opened a blank document and typed 3 sentences, effective 2 weeks from today. I resigned from my position at Summit Housing Group. Mariel Keaton, I signed, printed, and folded the page once. Crisp and deliberate. Dan's office door was open when I knocked. He looked up, still grinning, just in time. Mariel, I'm resigning. I set the letter on his desk. His smile faltered, twitched, then vanished. What? He picked up the paper as if it were written in another language. You're serious. I've already sent it to HR. He stood quickly, palms open like he was calming a hostage. Now hold on. Let's not make rash decisions. Think about your son, your mortgage, bills. Walking away now, it isn't smart. I stayed steady. I've thought about it. He tried again. What if we create a new role, Director of Site Logistics? Same pay. Maybe a bump in 6 months? You'd report to Jason, but you'd keep oversight. No. He blinked, stunned at the bluntness. He lowered his voice. Sharp now. You've built your whole network under Summit. That's proprietary knowledge. If you leave like this, I can't promise glowing references. I tilted my head. I'm not burning the bridge. Dan, I'm just done walking across it. The silence stretched. His jaw worked, but no words came. The first Monday after my resignation. I found Jason already at my desk, 3 monitors open and 2 legal pads scattered with frantic scribbles. His eyes were wide, the kind of wide that comes when the weight of responsibility finally lands. Marielle, he stammered, pointing at a spreadsheet. Is this compliance deadline for Glendale? Is it today? I leaned over his shoulder. A red cell blinked in the corner, glaring like a warning light. The paperwork had been due the previous Friday. Missing it meant a late penalty and tense calls from city liaisons who already disliked Summit. Jason dragged a hand down his face. No one told me this was on my plate. You're not shadowing anymore, I said, my voice calm but firm. It's all on your plate now. I walked him through the fix, pulled the right bid file from my backup, flagged the lines the civil team needed, and called their office to push the documents through before the deadline hit. He nodded along, sweating, his pen scratching notes he'd never remember. By noon, my phone started ringing. Alan Mitchell, a senior partner at one of our redevelopment clients, didn't mince words. I just got a call from Jason. Is he really taking over your projects? Because if he shows up at next week's liaison meeting unprepared, we walk. That same afternoon, another client from Tucson left a message. We don't have time to train your replacement. What's going on over there? I kept my answers polite. Professional. I'll make sure things transition smoothly. But inside, I saw it plain as day. Dan hadn't promoted a leader. He'd crowned a liability. For the rest of the week, I patched leaks in silence, rewriting survey notes, smoothing emails, filling gaps Jason didn't know existed. I wasn't doing it for him or for Dan. I was doing it because my name was still attached, and my pride wouldn't let projects collapse in my final days. Each call, each save, sharpened a truth that steadied me. Summit had the title to give away, but the trust had never left my hands. By the middle of my second week, the tension in the building had shifted. Whispers followed me down the hall. Jason avoided eye contact, his shoulders hunched under the weight of mistakes he didn't know how to fix. When Dan's assistant popped her head into my office with a clipped, "He wants to see you now," I already knew the storm had broken. Dan's office door shut hard behind me. Jason sat in one of the chairs, hands clasped like a boy waiting for scolding. Dan stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. "I've been getting calls," he began, his voice sharp. "A lot of calls, clients saying they're confused, that you're undermining Jason while you're still on payroll. I stayed standing. They're calling me because they don't trust the handoff you forced on them." His eyes narrowed. "You're poisoning the pipeline. Marielle, You're leveraging what you learned here to poach contracts. That's confidential. I'll have legal draft a cease and desist if I have to. I let the silence stretch before answering, calm and level. There's no non-compete in my contract, no NDA. Every conversation I've had has been about their deadlines, their projects, their concerns. Nothing about Summit's internal processes. Jason shifted in his chair. Opening his mouth, Dan snapped, "Stay out of it." He looked back at me. "You think you're untouchable, no?" I said, "I think I'm trusted." "That's different." The room went quiet, the air heavy. I could feel Jason shrinking, his gaze fixed on the carpet. "Finally," I softened my tone, directing it past Dan to the young man beside him. "I'll finish my 2 weeks. I'll even make sure Jason doesn't sink the Mesa project. I'm willing to train him, walk him through the permit pipeline, the why behind each step. But after that, it's on him." Jason gave the smallest nod, relief flickering in his eyes. Dan's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The silence was answer enough. I turned toward the door, steady, unhurried, leaving them both sitting in the weight of truth they could no longer spin. 2 days before my notice expired, I slipped out for a long lunch. The drive downtown felt different than the commutes I'd memorized, lighter somehow, like the city had cracked open and revealed a path I hadn't seen before. The glass tower of Lancer Equity Partners gleamed against the Denver sky, polished and unapologetic. Waiting in the lobby was Naomi Flores, a recruiter I'd met years earlier at a zoning conference. She was the kind of woman who never wasted words or time. Sharp blazer, sharper eyes. "Mariel," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Took you long enough." I laughed softly. Had to finish a few things first. She led me upstairs to a corner office overlooking the freeway. Maps and project boards lined the walls, but there was no clutter, no hollow motivational slogans. It felt alive, focused. Naomi handed me a folder across the table. "I won't waste your time," she said. "We've wanted you here for over a year. Director of Property Development, 95,000 base plus incentives, full autonomy on projects. Start date as soon as you're ready." I glanced at the numbers, though my mind had already made the leap, 35% more than Summit ever paid me, and for the title Dan had gifted away like a party favor. But more than the salary, it was the freedom in her words, full autonomy. I set the folder down. "I'm in." Naomi's lips curved into a grin. "Smart choice. We've got 3 developments lined up, 2 in Texas, 1 outside Tucson. I want you on the Arizona site by next month. I'll be ready," I said. And I meant it. She walked me back to the elevator, her heels clicking like punctuation on every step. As the doors slid open, she looked at me with something between respect and triumph. "You're not walking away empty-handed," she said. I shook my head. "I'm walking with everything that matters." When the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel, steady eyes, shoulders lifted, for the first time in years. I didn't look tired. I looked free. 6 months after I walked out of Summit's doors, Naomi slid a trade magazine across my desk. The headline stretched in bold black letters, "Summit Housing loses major contracts after leadership shakeup." Beneath it was a photo of Jason at a city council podium, sweat staining his collar as he stumbled through a zoning law he clearly didn't understand. The article laid it out without mercy: client walkouts, missed compliance deadlines, delayed projects in Mesa and Glendale, contractors pulling out over payment disputes. Dan had been ousted after an investor revolt, and Jason resigned 2 weeks later, a casualty of a stage he was never ready for. I closed the magazine slowly, not with glee, but with the calm certainty of someone who had already seen it coming. Summit hadn't promoted vision. They'd inherited chaos. Meanwhile, my world at Lancer was unrecognizable compared to the life I'd left. The Arizona project broke ground ahead of schedule, budgets balanced, inspectors signed off without endless battles, and contractors actually answered calls the first time. Naomi backed my decisions, even the risky ones, and my team worked with a rhythm that felt more like respect than fear. Calls started coming in, First, from old colleagues who had weathered Summit's collapse. Muriel. Are you hiring? I can't stay here anymore. I passed the good ones along to HR, knowing they'd finally land in a place that valued them. Then came the contractors. A foreman from Pueblo said, "We've followed you through 3 projects. If you're at Lancer, we're with you." Clients followed the same pattern, sliding into my inbox with quiet questions that were really offers of loyalty. Are you open to taking us on by the end of the month? The picture was clear. Summit had the name, the office, the logo on the building. But I had what mattered: the trust of the people who actually built and invested and signed contracts, sitting in that bright corner office. I realized I hadn't just left a company. I'd carried its backbone with me, and without it, Summit crumbled. One evening after a site visit in Aurora, I pulled off the freeway, too tired to cook at home. The neon sign of an old diner flickered against the darkening sky. The same place I used to stop when Summit had me running city meetings late into the night. Inside, the booths were cracked, the coffee smelled burnt, and the familiarity wrapped around me like an old coat. I slid into a booth near the back and ordered eggs and black coffee. That's when I saw him. Jason sat 2 tables over, hunched forward under the harsh light. A hoodie replaced his polos, and the expensive watch was gone. His table was crowded with textbooks, notebooks scrawled with diagrams, and a stack of highlighted zoning manuals. A pencil was tucked behind his ear. He looked up, startled. When he noticed me, "Marielle," he said, sheepish. "Hey." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect to see you here." He gave a small laugh that didn't carry far. "Didn't expect to see anyone. Night classes. Construction management. Figured it was time to actually learn what I thought I already knew." I glanced at the mess of papers. Real formulas, permit timelines, spec sheets, work he should have known before Summit ever gave him a title. He leaned back, embarrassed. "Thanks for not throwing me to the wolves." "You could have made my life hell those last 2 weeks, but you didn't." I was arrogant. Thought I could fake it till I made it. Turns out faking it just costs people money. I set down my fork and met his eyes. "Everyone deserves a second shot," I said evenly. "But not everyone deserves to start at the top." He nodded, no argument left in him. For the first time, I saw humility where smugness used to live. When the check came, I asked the waitress to add his to mine. Jason didn't notice. His head was bent over a zoning chart again. I left quietly, stepping back into the cool Colorado night. I didn't need to look back. My future was already ahead of me.